Welcome to The Edge. We're back once again, and I'm solo. Jay's traveling the world like a celebrity chef griping about pineapple pizza, but I believe otherwise, and that's a conversation for another day. Joining me today in another of my series of favorite IT people I've met on my path is a gentleman who had a strong influence on both SDN and SD-WAN. He's worked in data protection. He's been a product manager for a well-known WAN optimization company, but I got to know him at his time in VMware, where he was the vice president of the NSBU, better known as NSX, as well as the GM for VMware's Cloud Services Business Unit. He's now the CEO for Sentry.io. Milin Desai, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's get into it. We always start this show with kind of an introduction of how you got into IT. It's kind of what I call the superhero's origin story. Millis, give us your path. How'd you get into IT?
Yeah, so growing up, my dad is a mechanical and electrical engineer, and you kind of always look up to your dad, and he was doing really well in his career, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a mechanical engineer, and you're talking about like 1994 time frame, and I remember my first cousin, who is a ex-scientist from NASA, Lifetime of Achievement Award from there, was visiting us. And he kind of started talking, me and him started talking about computers. And I'm like, this is kind of cool, I think. And so around 10th grade is when I decided to kind of make the switch or make the decision switch from not going after mechanical engineering and kind of pursuing this path of computer science. And what was really interesting and what kind of really triggered everything for me and, can almost trace the path to where I am today is we started a small company when I was in my undergrad over there, building websites for India, which is, you think about like the internet back then, it was not as prevalent, right? So dial-up modems and everything else. And so we built the first 100 websites back in India. And through that interaction, both technical as well as the business side of it, meeting customers, going over design, talking about numbers, right? The payment part of it, and getting a paycheck yourself. All of that was such a great experience, and that I think is the formation of why I eventually moved to the business side. Because the person I worked for said, "Hey, you may want to keep this in mind. You actually can connect technology and business, and that's a great skill to have." So, long story short, come here, do my master's at USC. It was really hard to get my first job because this was 2001, if you remember. So I always say that you do need luck. You do need a great network. And both of those things happened for me. Joined Veritas, phenomenal experience as a fresh grad, got great mentors along the way. And then decided I want to move to product because that's what I like to do, connect dots and do things along that side. Moved to Riverbed, felt like I was up for something bigger. And then here comes along VMware, took a step down actually. When I left money on the table, took a step down to join VMware. And I would say VMware was basically a combination of amazing people, great leadership, and as a result, great opportunity that came along. And along the way, got to meet folks like you and work alongside folks like you and kind of try to change the paradigm of software-defined networking in that. And so that's the VMware journey. We can talk about that ad nauseum. The thing that got me to Sentry was my belief that the decade we are in is the decade for data and developers. And so whether you look at all the data companies that are already out there, or if you talk about AI is actually the data that feeds it, right? We talk about security. Security is a bunch of data giving signals, and driving decision making. So I think companies that are effective in using data, are effective in presenting data, are going to be kind of at the forefront. And given all the friction that has been removed from building things, developers are going to build faster, build a lot. And I think that persona is going to be relevant. So Sentry surfaces, of course, with the developer persona, helps developers, fix software in terms of issues that they face. And so that was kind of my love for Sentry, kind of coming in 3.5 years and still loving it. Again, great set of people. That's the common theme across my career. I was lucky with having great people to work with and great people to work for.
Awesome. So we had a conversation recently with somebody from your past, Sean Odell, if you probably remember him. And we talked a little bit about that developer. How do you sell to, how do you, the difference between selling to developers versus your standard channel methodology? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know, Martin Cruzado had his big speech, I think it was in 2016, where he, the age of the developer and called it this shift of go to market. Do you want to talk a little bit about that change of selling to developers versus selling to, your standard channel? Because you've done both.
Yeah, the single biggest difference is like the developer who is kind of on the receiving end of it. There are two things, right? It just needs to work. Like there is no, I send you something, you trial it 7 different ways, you do 8 different things. It needs to be easy where they can plug it, they can use it, they can get going, right? And I think so the patience element, number one, is the barrier is very high in terms of quality of like getting started. The second thing is you just literally have to offer the software. There is no other like, let me start a POC. So the ability for them to access software very easily and try it out is probably a number one thing. And then from that, bringing value. So if you do those 3 things well, everything kind of cascades from that. And so a lot of people talk about developers and everything, but they're really still selling. As an example, when security talks about shift left, a majority of those companies that say they've shifted left are still selling to the CISO or still selling to operation teams or SecOps teams. They're not really selling to developers, right? We actually serve developers. The end user is the developer. If you look at observability solutions, a majority of them are selling to SREs and ops people with a few developers, and which is very different than selling to a developer. So I think ease of use, access to software, getting to value is probably number one. Then they look for things like, the community feedback on the product. So you have to be authentic. You have to be appreciated in the community. You have to be participative in the community. And a lot of kind of that also is closely aligned with the open source momentum. So, how much are you contributing to the community? Does not need to be your software is open source always, but are you contributing back in time, in dollars, and an active participant, or are you just a taker? There's a lot of companies that are just takers of open source, and they talk a big game. And so it's that those are some of the elements that come to play, which is meeting them where they work. There is no emails or fancy words or presentation. It's really the product in action. It's all product, right? In that. So that's kind of the biggest difference in that. Reaching that audience is very difficult. Because as you know, nobody, they will just delete your email as soon as they see a sales pitch in that. So, so meetups, great technical write-ups, podcasts, they listen to podcasts and they listen to certain folks, right? Being active in the community is how you have to reach them. So that's kind of the big difference in go-to-market and engagement and versus selling to, say, IT ops, where there is a much more set way of engagement.
Do you see that model moving into the infrastructure space at any time? Because it's a very different sales motion, and we're dealing with different types of widgets. But do you see this kind of developer influencer model becoming more dominant within, more traditional, selling network devices or hardware devices, or even, the overlay software, which, we collaborated on with VMware?
It's harder for that because, in terms of when it comes to, because you have to deal with a whole different cycle of procurement and other elements so it's not like you can get started small and just auto scale yourself in these things. So I think there is an element of that. There is a life cycle to some of this decision making, which actually slows down versus if you think about a piece of new software that makes you makes the software more secure. Let's say some SBOM thing, which is the hottest thing these days, right? In security. And so you can try it and you can turn it around versus, buying hardware devices, which it's a 3-year, 4-year decision point. The trials are longer, procurement and everything else. I think the mechanisms will get more like developers. I think the systems of records or the way you buy or procure will not change. I think the way you engage or educate, I think will start to look more and more kind of like how you engage with a person. More self-learning, more content-driven in that, because everybody's getting cognitive overload in that. So,
yeah, that makes sense. Let's go back a little bit. A lot of people don't know what a product manager is. When they interact with a company, they have no idea who this person is, what they do. Can you talk a little bit about the role of a product manager?
By the way, this is a really tough question because it also depends on the industry that you serve. Generally speaking, it seems like product manager is this really cool role, and it is if you do it right. And it is I would say a majority of folks struggle in the role for a variety of reasons. I explain why. At the simplest level, I would tell you is, if you think of a product manager, they are making sure, I'll give an analogy of a boat. Like everybody on the boat is moving in the same direction. Everybody is connected and synchronous, and hopefully nobody's about to fall off, right? And so you're taking care of you're the kind of guiding ship. And people confuse this with product managers make the decisions on what's going to make it. Product managers are the visionaries. Some people have used the term CEOs, whatever you call it, right? If you're helping navigate a boat full of people and keeping everybody synchronous, happy, and safe, you could say they're the CEO, they're the leader, right? I look at it as a very simple thing, which is you figure out the why we're doing something, right? If a product manager cannot tell you why X is more important than Y, and as a result, we need to do X, that's bad, right? So it's not just about prioritization, it's about the why behind it. And then the what, not the how, right? The what being, what are we, why are we doing this? And the what, how, basically what are we doing, right? And so this comes back to not being in the weeds of implementation, but making sure the user element. And we talked about this back in the day. Remember when we used to say, hey, this is the workflow I care about, or this is how I would consume it, or this is how it needs to work with other systems of record that I have. And to be able to articulate that, a day in the life of. So if you do the why very well, you do the day in the life of very well, that's kind of the core genesis of what you do. And then from there in, it's communication, internal, external, making sure things are on track. But a lot of times people get either bogged down internally, or they are external, but they're always in pitch mode. They're not in listen mode. So simplest thing I would tell you is the why, and essentially, the what, and how to get to that. And the best way to get to that is you need to be an excellent communicator, a dot connector. When I say a dot connector, you have to listen for signals, right? And drive that. But that's what I see a product manager do, which is kind of owning the outcome, the business outcome, not just the technical outcome, and taking people for a ride alongside that. And so that's why it's a hard job. People sometimes get lost in the myriad of things you can do as a product manager. But if you own the business outcome, get everybody on that journey, constantly communicate, and make things happen, that's what I see as a product manager.
But it's not only the inputs from internally within the business, but it's also customers requesting features. How do you balance the two? Because I think that's, to me, that one of the greatest challenges is I've got a customer requesting this feature. The internal business is on this path. They need this done. And then you're dealing with your technical debt. It's almost in some ways like a middle manager within an IT organization, because there's pressures from above, there's pressures from below, there's pressures from the outside, the inside. It's a tough role.
It is. And that's why it's important to understand the why, right? And so in a lot of confusion sometimes happens is product managers try to be visionaries. No, you're not. Because vision needs to come from the engineering team. You have a CTO, you're part of it, but you don't need to kind of own I am the one trying to bring that together. And so the biggest thing is, if you've kind of written down a plan of where you want to take the business as a group, then the inputs basically either validate that or require small changes in direction. What I would tell you is not every customer request needs to be addressed right away. And we've had that discussion too, which is sometimes I've come back to you and said, hey, we can't do this for a little bit. And I apologize for this, but this kind of strays us from kind of our objective, which is this. Now, if you don't buy into that other piece, I may lose you over time as a customer, right? Because you're like, I don't agree with where you're going. So that's why it's super important to write down where you're trying to go, the outcome you're trying to drive, and then everything feeds into that. Internal stuff, external stuff from customers, left field ideas that may come from your CEO, all of the above. So if you set that direction, then everything kind of validates that. And then you make small changes to that. Sometimes you have to sometimes things come out of nowhere, right? But for the most part, as long as you stick to those core principles, like at Sentry, we have a core operating principle. We don't build for a few, we build for the many, which means if it has to be something that can enable a broad swath of customers versus a customer. And in our history, we've let go of 7-figure opportunities, with that mindset. So you have to be comfortable with that decision-making prowess. So it all again starts with, the why and how you want to operate as a group. And if you have clarity on that, all of this decision-making becomes much, much easier.
I like what you said about the why and writing it down, constantly reflecting on it, because I think that helps you in your journey. Let's switch topics a little bit. Software-defined networking. Can you kind of go into the origins of it? Because to 2010s, really to 2023 almost, has been, in terms of infrastructure, that period of software-defined networking, and it's really changed how we build networks, how we manage networks, and the value propositions associated with it. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of why we needed to do software-defined networking as opposed to traditional networking?
So some of this, of course, started a little before I started thinking of the problem. So I'm kind of just making sure historically I'm factual. So I joined VMware around 2010, and the ball was already rolling a little bit on this front, both internal to VMware and external to VMware. And so, external to VMware, there were companies like Nicira, which Martin founded, and a few others. And internally, there were initiatives already underway, kind of thinking about what this means. And why was that thought process coming about? It was coming about because, and this is something I discovered, like my simplest thing was I came in and I started talking to folks who were using VMware at a certain scale, right? And this came about because of virtualization, server virtualization. What used to be one physical machine now has 10 of them in there. And then this concept of a cluster and vMotion, which allowed you to have flexible compute across potentially racks, right? And typically rack was the boundary of everything. So you put a VLAN in there, everything was fine. And what started to happen is as virtualization matured and as things like vMotion became kind of core to the element, in 2010, we started hearing questions like, oh, the network is getting in the way. I can't move fast enough. Provisioning is taking time in that, number one. So it became that was one kind of problem statement I was hearing. The second thing was around this idea of elasticity. And elasticity within a domain, I'm just calling a cluster, within the data center. Some crazy folks are talking about cross data center stuff. Still, there's a debate about whether that's a great use case or not. But generally speaking, like there was an element of that. Other ways people are expressing things around this was not in terms of like VLANs and stuff like that. It was more in terms of getting an IP address, right? Like yep. Simple things like that were starting to percolate up. And, as we processed it and there was some internal work going on, we started talking about this idea of what if there was an API that essentially allowed you to provision a network. It still had a boundary, so a virtual network, and you could assign it an ID and you could just drop things in it and they were its own kind of little thing, right? And so this, I feel like a lot of this came from the early days of what you now call cloud computing, where everybody is provisioned stuff willy-nilly. Plus, the maturity of things like vSphere clusters and vMotion and the paradigms that they enabled. And so the combination of that agility is probably what is what drove the discussion to maybe having a API-centric approach, which resulted in this concept of SDN, right? Starting with, layer 2, layer 3 and above in that.
Yeah, and I recall, and one of the challenges you sort of brought it up is this, as you bring in a new technology into an organization, the organization has to adjust. And I recall back several meetings we had, and you brought me into a room and we had a discussion around cultural changes and how do you build, how do you break down silos and those types of things. And I thought, why are we doing this? And then it's dawned on me that an organization has to go through this rapid change. And it's very similar to what's going on today with SASE, SSE, this transition of adding security into networking, which you guys were doing earlier with the NSX microsegmentation firewalls and those sorts of things. Can you talk to me a little bit about how VMware and yourself kind of came upon this idea that networking and the infrastructure team really had to kind of blend and come together and understand for this type of product to be successful?
As with any kind of I'm going to use the VMware example, but this is very true if you were a startup, right? Which is the number one thing you do is go try to validate, will somebody buy? And who is the person who will write the check or will authorize the check? And as we went out, we noticed a pattern, right? Of course, there were smaller companies or organizations where the virtualization team said, hey, I can kind of go manage this with my networking team and make the decision and make the purchase. But for a vast majority, they were like, this might require me to talk to a different person. And so those were kind of very clear signs that we were crossing a persona boundary. And as a result, we had to do one of two things. We could either change the product to service the persona that is a network admin, a traditional network admin, who till that point was physical switches and physical routers and configs and living in a different world, which was non-API centric. Or another approach would be to kind of create a bridge for these folks into the virtual world without the burden of that. And so we made the conscious decision to essentially enable the cloud team, which is now known as kind of the cloud team, right? Which is the virtualization folks to do the provisioning and enablement, but with the boundary principles that are set by the networking team. And so that we basically, I can tell you the scar tissue that we have from this, the amount of travel Martin, myself did in terms of selling the vision, talking to network folks, convincing them. Remember, at that point in time, we had the big behemoth who was pushing the anti-message to what we were doing. So every time we would walk in, somebody walks in right after us with 10 more people where they have CCIEs and all these careers set on that other vendor. And they were pushing a different narrative, right? And so long story short, it was just, we realized we needed to do it. We enabled the product to do that. A lot of education. We found champions like you who helped us cross the boundary early on, showed us what makes sense, how to kind of, bridge that gap. We used champions like you to tell the story so that they heard it from somebody who is a peer from that domain knowledge versus like, hey, here's a virtualization guy talking to me about networking or virtualization gal talking to me about networking. So we tried to do it via making sure we knew the methodology, right? We are still catering to the virtualization cloud team in terms of getting them that agility and flexibility, but with the rules set by the network and security team. And then using those champions that we've created to educate others. And you remember we had a transformation program that we started doing. We had a certification program that we brought in, I think year 3 or 4, for CCIEs to become virtual network admins and other things. That was a progressive story. Early on, a lot of scar tissue, a lot of one-on-one, and then finding champions like you that help us kind of tell the story externally in that. So that was kind of the recipe. But it's super important in your journey to really look yourself as in the mirror as a team and say, who are we selling to? Who will write that check? Who are we building the product for? Is it for the network admin? Because that's a different selling motion. Or are we building for a virtualization team, which becomes a cloud team, and we'll have a virtual network admin in the future? And so knowing that allowed us to kind of create the clarity on this. And that is very important when you build any new product or company. Who are you selling to? Is it, number one is the persona, the size of the company. Is it mass market? Is it mid-market? Is it enterprise? All of the above. That helps kind of shape a lot of things and go to market as a result of that. So hopefully that made sense.
No, it made sense. But the pain is still real. It's just transitioned over to networking and security folks. And I can tell you on a regular basis, it's hard to figure out, who owns the budget, or trying to get these teams to come together. I mean, the worst case scenario is security goes out and buys a product in the SASE space, and the network team disagrees with it. And then you get this, I've seen it, where you get the competitive nature of, hey, I want this product, they're going to get this product, and nothing happens. And as a result, nothing changes. Any advice for, say, mid-level or even senior level infrastructure folks out there that are looking to break down silos? Have you seen any methodologies or processes work for them to kind of bring teams together to get them to understand the why, so that they can be successful in, because essentially networking and security have to come together for this to be successful. It has to be done. The challenge is obviously the people. The technology is there. In my opinion, it's the people that are really the reason a lot of these technologies are not being adopted as rapidly as they should be.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what it comes down to, right? So I think the biggest way, if you were somebody who is championing the cause to a forward-thinking model, the number one thing I would tell you is make sure you have alignment from the business side, and so whether you call it leadership, 2 levels up, 3 levels up, like you have the buy-in. And I'm not saying use that as a stick, but that helps in terms of air cover. You still have to lead with empathy because you have to take people on a journey. Otherwise, if you force them along, sometimes it just doesn't work. So I think number one is alignment. And then the question, like I would simply bring up, is what is the outcome we are trying to achieve as a group? And if the outcome is, to your point, to be more secure along these vectors, right? So when you talk about like network security and security, there's an intersection vector in that. And we're saying, hey, we need to get a better, clear strategy on those fronts. So having, again, I'm trying to simplify this, but having that outcome known, the common, things we want to go achieve written down, and then creating a dialogue about like, what are the approaches? And then you can start with this idea of existing to modern, or approach A to C, and create a forum of discussion. Now, I'm not saying meetings for the sake of meetings. At some point, you have to just go. So the simplest way to say is, we know the outcome. This is what we are trying to do. What would a good proof of concept look like? And then just rolling in the 3 vendors, a traditional vendor from networking, a modern security vendor, or somebody who blends both, and doing a POC. And that makes it black or white. It allows to create operational boundaries and then move ahead. So I always say, like, a lot of this is broken down because people think you are trying to push your agenda as an individual and trying to seek control versus here's the outcome. Here's what we want to go achieve. Let's look at these people. Here's the criteria, right? How does your life get better? How does my life get better? Where do we collaborate things on? And then running that kind of proof of concept in that. And alongside all of this is some lightweight education material. As a vendor, you may have to have lightweight education material on how these teams function. That's why I use the term day in the life of a lot, which is when my product is working in an environment, what does the day in the life of look like for a network admin or for a security admin, or if an issue happens, how can they collaborate? It may also help you shape your product to have those pieces of collaboration or intersection in product or through communication. Like a Slack alert goes out to both members of the organization saying, John may want to collaborate on this. Just making it up right now. So I think that's kind of the blueprint that has worked for me consistently, whether it was at VMware focusing on networking, then security, then cloud, and now even talking to developers, right? Which is, what's the shared outcome?
Right. So let's move on a little bit. I want to talk about growth in a company because your journey at VMware and as part of the NSBU, you basically, it was like a startup. I mean, you guys started with almost zero. Well, you did start with zero revenue. And then over a short period of time, you got it up over $1 billion, which is outstanding. Any startup would be jealous of that outcome. Can you talk a little bit about how the company as a whole and how your influence kind of helped that rise from basically in a span of just like few short years from 0 to $1 billion. That's an outstanding outcome. So can you talk a little bit about how that happened and what were some of the pillars of success there?
Number one, I think we had like a phenomenal support top down, right? From the C-suite. If there's just alignment that we have to make this successful, right? So and this comes back to that last question, which is, we have to make our network secure and so there's no discussion like at that point in time, right? So think of that similar kind of paradigm, but except at a business level. So that level of clarity just helps kind of move things along much faster in decision making. So, so by having that, that top-down mandate in a way of alignment, decision making was faster, significantly faster. It was, I don't have to put 7 meetings. This is the plan. And then if there was something we needed different, we would just go ask. And it was a quick decision process, right? Because everybody was bought into it. And so that's number one. Number two, I would tell you is we got extremely lucky. You could say lucky or we were just good, but we really had a great team. And I whether you look at having folks like Martin join us from Nasira to, just the leadership from Raghu and existing folks like Bogomil, who's now at Sequoia and others. There was just kind of like a set of people that had clarity of thinking, an understanding of where we wanted to kind of move and drive things. So I feel like that was the second ingredient. And the third ingredient was essentially, this opportunity that was in front of us, which is we basically operated, like you said, internally, there was a term like, it was like a pirate ship. We literally just wanted to win. There was an obsession to kind of get to the outcome. And so that essentially helped us move fast on product. We were fortunate enough to have our own kind of overlay team, you could call it, that allowed us to, aggressively, be out there in the market. So those were kind of the three pieces, I would call it. If you look at kind of the actual journey, it was a combination of solving a problem, which was needed in this domain called virtualization. So we did have a captive kind of install base. So that definitely helped, right? Which is we went into a captive install base, which is VMware vSphere, to solve a problem that you knew you wanted to solve, right? So then the second piece of that was how do you scale that from vision-based selling, the thing we talked about, to like an everyday conversation. So we first 2 years was a lot of vision selling, kind of hand-to-hand combat. Through that, with the help of folks like you, we came up with those use cases. Remember the 9 box we had?
Yep.
And so that 9 box of use cases, something which I was fortunate to be able to create with the help of customers like you, which it said, we help you with automation, we help you with security, we help you with multi-site, disaster recovery and all of that stuff. And that changed the tide of the conversation, one from talking about overlay networking and stuff like that, to one that said, oh shit, yes, I want to stop east-west traffic. Boom, I need NSX. Oh, I want to provision an entire 3-tier app in minutes. Boom, I need NSX, because it changed the conversation. DR, I need a second, I don't want to change can you automate the whole process on the DR side, right? So that changed the trajectory. And I still always come back to use cases all the time, which is tell people what problem you can solve and you do it uniquely, you do it really well. That changed the trajectory of our selling, which got us from like hand-to-hand combat. We fueled more salespeople. We did the certification stuff. All the other ingredients came alongside that. But cracking kind of why we exist, what problems do we solve, getting a few of those wins early on and then writing those down and communicating that, boom, magic, right? At which point it became a recipe. Let's go solve that, right? Continuously. So that's kind of how that journey went about. And I would say we got lucky along the way. Of course, there's always some of that. We had great customers. That was definitely helpful. As you know, that was so hard that time. But the biggest ingredient in all of this was alignment, right? There was never a question of we are going to lose. We just went for it. We iterated, we changed, we moved, right? So that definitely helped. And I kudos to VMware's leadership for going all in, right? So that definitely helped folks like me as a result of that.
And as a customer, there was a certain energy associated with that group. It was just infectious. You wanted to be part of it. You wanted to get on the bandwagon. You wanted to move it forward. To me, that was one of the things. You just had to be there, and you had to be moving it in a direction. So let's move on to what you're doing now, Sentry.io. Let's talk a little bit about what the company does and what sort of problems you solve.
Yeah, at the simplest level, everyone is shipping software multiple times a day, in some cases at least once a week now for most organizations. And when that software breaks, and when I say break, as in when the customer is using it, whether it's you loading up your favorite app on your phone and it doesn't load, or it crashes, or you're checking out on an e-commerce site. When all those things are happening in real time, we are telling the developers that something's broken and how many users are affected. It's only happening on, say, a mobile Android version X, or it's happening on a Chrome browser or whatever that environment thing is, down to the line of code that's broken. And the potential committer who committed that piece of code. So imagine that whole cycle of something's broken, people will complain on the internet, or there will be support tickets coming in. That entire life cycle is taken off because you ship code, you observe it for 24, 48 hours initially, whether it's an error, whether it's slow software, any of that. We give you all the context. The developer gets the notification, the team gets the notification. You know where the line of code is broken. You essentially can roll it back, you can fix it, patch it, move on. And so that's what we do. We started with the front end with JavaScript. We do front end, back end, mobile. We do error monitoring. So when errors are thrown, we give all the context around it. We do developer-centric APM. So yes, there's APM, as you know, existed.
Yep.
We do it for developers, not ops people. So tell you where your code is slow. Tracing, as you call it, from a technology standpoint, distributed tracing. And also, we will tell you how much of your code is tested or untested. So it's kind of like that lifecycle element focused on software quality to the developer. We've got 50,000 plus customers from the leading brand names in streaming or in developer tools, or big SaaS names or consumer brands. All of them use Sentry to help their developers ship quality code faster, right? So that's what we do. Completely different from our domain of infrastructure back in the day, but very relevant in the same way, because that was the thesis, is developer first. Let's go help software developers ship software faster.
From a security perspective, does it also help them create more secure code as well? I mean, that seems to be a constant challenge out. I mean, I don't know how many times the latest Move It has exposed my personal information. It's one of those things I read the news. I'm like, oh, there it goes again. How about quality for security?
Not yet. We have some elements we do in terms of security, but we've not ventured in that path. And I can again explain the reason behind it of why not yet. Is our whole model is you sign up on our website as a developer, you have a free plan, or you start a trial. After that, it's $29 or whatever you want to pay us, right? And everybody we have 99.99% of our customer base doesn't talk to a human. And so when you
Wow.
think about, yeah, exactly. So it's very much like it just works, right? And so when you think about security, it will be a different, today, all of the security elements, even though people say shift left and all of that, it's still not the developer who's driving that, right? And so it's a different buyer, a different persona, a different motion in that. And so when we looked at kind of go to market, we said, hey, that we'll have to completely build a different motion of selling, number one. And so that has been kind of like one deterrent for us to not get into those concepts yet. And the second deterrent is, what exactly will we solve for developers that others have not solved, or can we do it better? And then, okay, what is that? And can we really do it better than anybody else? And so I think we don't have clarity on both those vectors. I have some clarity on the latter, like what could we solve for them? But I would say it's not super clear on how we could do it better. And then as you know, you can't dip your toe in security. You have to make, you have to go 2 feet in and commit to it, right? Kind of like when VMware committed to going into networking and security as a domain. So kind of, I didn't want to tiptoe on one end. The go-to-market is different, so we've stayed away. But I generally feel there is an intersection here where there are companies that are now starting to do things like they scan your code for where are you connected externally. And every release before you ship, it can tell you all the violations of like, this is new, your data exfiltration is happening, or you're connecting to a new data source. And I think those are things that we can bring early in the CI cycle and kind of catch it, right? And then as a result, integrate into CD. And so say, oh, we're seeing new forms of data going out, stop, right? And let us take a look. So there are opportunities to do things along those fronts. I think there's opportunity around where is the source code coming from, right? Especially open source and ChatGPT and all that fun stuff that's coming in. And libraries that you use and the quality of that, SBOM and other things. And so I think a lot of that can come in earlier in the life cycle. I've not seen like a great example of truly that moving left. So the question is it a CI/CD play? And where in that does it plug in? And I feel like best of breed players should exist in that versus like everybody just trying to add it as a bolt on. That's my perspective, of course, but the market might say otherwise.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I could continue this for a long time with you because there's so many other questions I have. But I think we've kind of run out of those things. So let's ask a few fun questions. What's been your ultimate vacation, or do you have an ultimate vacation planned for your future?
You know what? I don't know if I have an ultimate vacation planned, but like the ingredients I look for in an ultimate vacation are a lot of kind of beach time, like, water, and relaxation associated with it. A little bit of history, a little bit, not too much.
Ooh, okay.
Right? Like, in that, so not getting overloaded with historical, but just enough. And a lot of good food. So those three combined with the main ingredient, which is family, I think that's my like four. I look for those four things. And we've been fortunate enough to do something along those lines recently through a trip in Italy. And then we just came back from Turkey, which was also phenomenal. It had all those pieces in there, and we loved it.
Yeah, Turkey's an amazing place. I remember going to Ephesus. Was it Ephesus? Yeah.
Yes.
One of the just ruins and there was some geological areas around it. That was an outstanding trip. I was thinking for a moment there, Dubrovnik in Croatia would be a great place to go.
I am actually going to Croatia for a conference, so I may check it out. But like that would be alone, so I wouldn't do it. But I agree. Ephesus was phenomenal. And that's what I mean, a little bit of history to kind of look at what happened. And then the story of the Cappadocia caves was intense. Like I'm just still shocked by kind of how people kind of carved out caves in the mountains, and the food scene is spectacular.
So let's talk about food. I know you love food too. What is are you a cook at all? Do you cook your own food, or are you more of a restaurant person for a good meal?
A little bit of both, I would say. We do like to cook a lot at home, and so a lot of that. I'm a big Blackstone griddle user, and
Okay.
so yeah, I've become a big fan of it. Everything from cooking Philly cheesesteaks to making you pav bhaji, which is like Indian street food. We love just kind of hosting in our backyard, and that's kind of my way to also decompress.
Yeah, during COVID, that kind of became my thing to do. We did a lot of the home kits and brought the food in, and from a variety of different providers of that. And that was kind of my thing to wind down in the evening, was to grab one of those and just randomly pick and try something I've never cooked before. And it was a great experience.
Yeah, no, we cook from scratch. We love it. And my wife is a better cook now than me. I'm admitting it on tape now. But yeah, I do my fair share and love it, actually. So
yeah, for us, it's I'm probably the more adventurous one, so I'll pick the meal and essentially make it. But she's got the amazing ability to just make it taste right. So it's a partnership there. But I think if she spent more time on it and was a little more adventurous, she'd just blow me out of the water, because that ability to just combine flavors and bring certain items out and lessen some others, that is
it's a skill.
An art.
It's a skill. Yeah, it's an art. More than a skill, it's art. You're right. Absolutely agree.
Yeah. Well, Milin, this has been amazing. Thanks for taking the time to catch up. Thanks for talking about software-defined networking, VMware, what a product manager is, and what you're doing today at Sentry.io. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. That was a fun conversation.